Aquest estiu, viu el grec.
Hola, bon dia. Moltes gràcies per ser aquí i avui realment tenim una presentació, una roda de premsa de luxe. Farem en català i anglès amb la traducció. Espero que vagi tot bé i que pugueu seguir la traducció. Doncs bé, bon dia. Moltes gràcies també als que esteu aquí, als periodistes. Aquestes són les últimes presentacions del festival, que no les menys importants. I divendres vinent a les 11 farem la roda de premsa de tancament, de balanç, etc. Però anem a presentar els projectes encara que ens queden aquesta setmana. Aquest, passaré de seguida la paraula al Robert, és un projecte molt desitjat, molt desitjat, molt perseguit. Em sembla que de seguida que vaig arribar al Grec, de les primeres converses que vam tenir amb tu va ser aquest. Volem fer aquest projecte, l'Auditori vol fer aquesta coproducció. De seguida ens hi vam sumar i les circumstàncies han fet que es presenti ara, però realment potser ha arribat també en aquell punt de maduresa i excepcionalitat tan fantàstica perquè el puguem disfrutar i evidentment tenim aquí el privilegi d'estar amb el David Lang i els directors, que em sembla que ja explica la importància que té aquesta producció. Et passo la paraula de seguida, ens expliques i anirem parlant tots els que estem aquí.
Molt bé, moltes gràcies, Cesc. Com deia el Cesc, avui és un plaer ser aquí per nosaltres, després de 6 anys de feina. Aquest és un projecte que neix com a coencàrrec a David Lang, de l'Auditori, al costat d'institucions tan rellevants com la Filharmònica de Nova York, el Barbican de Londres, l'Òpera de Malmö, el De Tolen de Rotterdam, Concertgebouw de Bruges i l'Orquestra Simfònica de Bochum. Justament abans de venir aquí he fet l'exercici d'entrar a la meva safata d'entrada, he fet una búsqueda, per això que comentava el Cesc justament, i he vist que les meves primeres converses amb la Filharmònica de Nova York i amb el Barbican de Londres es remunten al maig del 2017. Per tant, estem parlant de molts anys de feina i ha plogut moltíssim i han passat moltes coses al llarg d'aquest temps. Sens dubte, el repte més gran que hem hagut de salvar, com tots plegats, però també ha impactat aquest projecte, ha estat la pandèmia, perquè de fet vam poder inaugurar, estrenar l'òpera de David Lang al Lincoln Center de Nova York al juny del 2019 i fins i tot iniciar la gira europea al Barbican de Londres, però aleshores va esclatar la pandèmia i tot i que ho teníem previst i fins i tot publicat vam haver de cancel·lar tota la resta de la gira. I ara, quan hem tingut realment condicions de garantir amb èxit completar aquesta gira, doncs ho hem fet, som aquí, estem feliços. Aquest és el final de la gira, és l'últim concert i a més estem especialment emocionats de que sigui en tota una puesta de largo perquè contem amb tot l'equip aquí, Elkhanah Pulitzer, que és la directora escènica, ha vingut amb tot el seu equip d'Estats Units, evidentment David Lang, el creador d'aquesta meravella, que és una personalitat, sens dubte, ho teniu als papers, en el món de la nova creació actual, però també a Ludovic Marlot, que sabeu que és el nostre director titular a l'Auditori, a l'OBC, i que a més els uneix una feina prèvia, perquè es coneixen, són amics, han treballat conjuntament amb David abans, per tant tot ha quedat com molt rodó i ens fa molta il·lusió que sigui així. Penso que és important també mencionar una mica, donar el context del naixement d'aquest projecte. Ara fa 6 anys, totes les, diguéssim, grans institucions musicals a nivell internacional teníem al punt de mira una celebració important, que era la celebració de l'aniversari Beethoven. Això va ser, de fet, el naixement de Beethoven, els 250 anys de naixement de Beethoven, que s'havien de produir, s'havien de celebrar l'any 2020. Aquest projecte, de fet, a l'Auditori encaixava perfectament al marc de les diferents activitats que volíem tirar endavant per a aquesta celebració, perquè sabeu que és una obra que veu de la figura de Beethoven, d'una obra concreta de Beethoven, però que ho fa amb una lectura des de la modernitat. Teniu els papers, heu pogut llegir que l'obra de Lang veu de Fidelio, d'aquesta òpera de Beethoven. Fidelio ens parla d'amor, ens parla de llibertat, ens parla d'humanitat, però sembla que d'alguna manera passa de puntetes quan tracta temes més polítics. Potser, de fet, penso que segurament és un dels motius pels quals aquesta obra, la Fidelio de Beethoven, no gaudeix de la popularitat que gaudeixen altres obres de l'autor i fins i tot podríem dir que genera una certa frustració als seguidors del geni de Bond. David Lang el que proposa justament és endinsar-nos en aquesta reflexió política, posant al centre la figura del pres polític i d'alguna manera reflexionar sobre la instrumentalització que se'n fa des del poder. Ell ho explicarà millor que jo, però per aquí van els trets. Per tant, és un tema de radical actualitat, un tema que ens interessa molt tractar. Poca cosa més de part meva, agrair moltíssim la implicació del Festival Grec, sense el qual tot aquest projecte segur que no hauria estat possible, perquè hem fet tot aquest viatge junt, com comentava el Cesc, des de fa molts anys, des de fa 6 anys, ho vam intentar, ho vam cancel·lar, ho tornem a programar i ara estem aquí, per tant, sense ells això seria absolutament inviable i, evidentment, també al Palau de la Música, perquè aquesta gran producció, com veureu, compta amb un cor extraordinari d'homes, que són tots ells de diferents formacions. Després la Mercedes ens ho explicarà del Palau i és un luxe poder seguir col·laborant amb ells com fem amb diferents produccions cada any a l'auditori. Per acabar, comentar simplement que aquest és una mica per nosaltres el tret de sortida en una nova etapa de l'auditori en què pretenem ser més permeables amb la realitat que ens envolta, amb el nostre entorn, i reflexionar sobre els grans reptes de la societat del segle XXI. Per això hem traçat aquesta programació 23-24 sota el tema de poder o revolta. Per tant, iniciem aquesta revolta o aquesta reflexió sobre el poder amb David Lang, Elkhanah Pulitzer i tota aquesta... Evidentment no he mencionat tots els solistes amb què comptarem en aquesta producció, que són extraordinaris. Ho deixo pels experts que en parlin, i tenim aquí també a Neil Wallace, que ens està a la fila 0, coordinador de tot el projecte. Va iniciar un projecte que va néixer gràcies al Neil a The Dolen, a Rotterdam, que ha anat evolucionant i a la implicació de totes aquestes institucions que us he anat comentant. Per tant, moltes gràcies, Neil, i gràcies a tots per ser aquí.
Passem la paraula al David, si té el micròfon. David, please, can you get the microphone? It's on your side. Thank you very much. You can do it in English.
I'm very sorry that I don't speak Catalan. I'm very sorry. First of all, thank you all for being here, and thanks to every single person who has made this project possible. As Robert said, it's been a very long journey, and it wouldn't have happened without everyone here, so I really appreciate it. The journey is actually a lot longer than 6 years. So, because what really happened was I saw a production of Fidelio when I was 21. So that was, I have to say, a very long time ago. And you know, one of the things which is interesting as a classical musician is you like to think that classical music is a good thing, right? You know, we have all these myths about classical music, about how spiritual it is and powerful it is. And a lot of those ideas that we have, we get them from Beethoven. So Beethoven's idea about the Eroica Symphony, about the Ode to Joy, about the Fidelio, about the political nature of Fidelio, the very idea that a composer can deal with larger issues in the world was really something that Beethoven invented, you know. So every time you see a new piece that's about climate change, or a new piece that's about a war someplace, or about taking care of poverty, or any issue, really all of those pieces have their background in Beethoven. He sort of changed the job for us about what we thought our job as composers should be. So when I was young, I knew this about Fidelio, that it was our most important piece about freedom and about prisons. And I had been told this and told this and told this. And of course, I knew the beautiful O Welche Lust, where the prisoners stand out in the sunlight and they sing how great it is to be free. And so I was very excited to see this piece when I was 21 years old. When I was 21, I was a big lefty, so I was, you know, I won't go into that, but, you know, I was very political. And I went to see Fidelio thinking that it was going to be this great statement, and I didn't know anything other than that one chorus and the myth. And I came out very surprised and actually very disappointed that Beethoven could not go directly to the political issue. He had to hide it because of the world that he was from. And he hid it in a lot of ways. He hid part of it in saying that there's going to be something that he takes from comic opera, The idea that a woman dresses up as a man and then is mistaken as a man and a woman falls in love with him, that's totally out of comic opera, right? And it's played at the beginning of Fidelio as comedy. Then there's the issue of the relationship between the man and the wife, right? Fidelio gets a job as a prison assistant so she can find her husband, and she manages to free him. And at the end of the opera, when you want the townspeople to come out and say, everyone is freed, and to say, we love freedom and down with tyranny, and we must all organize. Instead, Beethoven has his singers sing, happy is the man who has a loving wife. So, I mean, I have a loving wife, but I don't think that she could free me from a prison. I know she would probably try, but she would be a very bad prison guard, I'm sure. But one of the interesting things about doing this piece here is that, and this is another way that Beethoven is hiding, he can't go directly to the politics, is Beethoven, writing this piece to be premiered in Vienna, has the piece take place in Spain. So, and it's not the Spain you live in, right? It's a mythical Spain to him, where people are not civilized, right? And that's why they have this horrible political system, right? Because he can't say, here is a message about the world I live in for the people I am with, for us to all pay attention to and for us to all organize around. So I was 21 years old, and then I started thinking, maybe it would be possible, maybe it would be possible to rewrite this piece, to get rid of all the things that were off the topic, which was interesting to me. And so finally, after all of these years, some very generous people let me do it. So I really appreciate that. What I did was I took Beethoven's librettos. Beethoven rewrote this piece twice, so there are 3 librettos. I took those librettos, I got rid of everything that was the comic opera and everything that was the romance and everything about how great it is to be married. And then I had the skeleton of Beethoven's story, and to that I added some other things that, that were commentary on Beethoven's original story. And is that enough for now? Or, I mean, that was a lot. So, but as you know, I'm a college professor. I can talk forever. So,
maybe we talk, everybody, then we come back to you if you want.
And now, Elkhanah Pulitzer, our director.
Please, it's on.
It is on. Hello. Thank you so much for having us here for this festival, and it's a wonderful collaboration. It's very interesting to see different organizations coming together to make this important story and to do it in such a beautiful place. We went to go visit the location for the performance, and it's truly a magical place. It's our first time also going outside. And so, yeah, we're very excited. I got involved in this piece, I'm not exactly sure when that was, sometime before the New York premiere. And what can I tell you? We've definitely been just looking at the themes within the piece and how to illuminate them in the design and in the performances. Themes around the erasure of identity that is very much a part of the prison systems, really throughout the world. That's a very big theme. There's also this idea that David actually teased out from the DNA of his own inquiry into what does it mean for this woman who is undercover to go into a prison and for 2 years try to break out someone she thinks might be her husband, but there's not certainty there. And then what do you do with the moral dilemma of finally arriving at the place where this man is being held? And what if he is or is not the man that she thinks he is or that he was? Or what if he's someone else? And what is her responsibility to that man? And you know, what is our responsibility to those people who are being held in those spaces? We're also working with a chorus that is actually combining younger men than we've ever worked with before, and that's a very interesting repercussion in terms of the dramaturgy of the story. The idea that there is no juvenile justice or system that is going to help manage and appropriately deal with youth. And so to see young boys really on stage who are part of the prison system, I think adds additional impact emotionally to the power of the story. I also think it's just interesting structurally, David, where you decided to add and develop the chorus as a role in the piece. Because obviously there's the big famous Beethoven choral moment, which is really the icon of the original. But I remember in the development of you working on the piece, you added a work song. And it's really interesting to see different facets of this core of prisoners and looking at what their day or their life is like and wanting to see a bit more about that journey. And so David added a work song, which I think harkens back to the history of exploitation and people everywhere around the world being forced to labor. And we're even seeing that politically in wars today where people are enlisting in order to get medicine or to get out of prison themselves. And so all of those political ramifications are very much alive and present in this piece. And we're thrilled that we're doing it on the eve of an important election. And that's where I'll leave that statement. But we're really, I think it's very important to be asking these questions. And so we are wanting to ask those questions with you all at this very important time.
Thank you very much. Ludovic, tu veux prendre la parole? Merci.
Hola a todos. I'll go in English as well, if I may. Well, first of all, I'd just like to thank the Grec for hosting us, because this is my debut here at the festival, and really excited about this. I guess I am the one maybe at this table, or on this panel, that is very happy that the production's been postponed, because that means selfishly I can be a small part of this. It's been tremendous to reunite with David. You know, we collaborated when I was in Seattle at the Seattle Symphony, actually through a commission, a big piece that David wrote for us called a Symphony Without a Hero, which I had conceived as a pairing with Strauss' Heldenleben, A Hero's Life. And I remember at the time being quite specific about the piece I wanted you to write, because I wanted this partner piece to the Strauss. When it comes to talking about Beethoven and you know what we do after Beethoven, it's been kind of a topic forever. I mean, we think of I can't help but think about Brahms trying to write his first symphony after Beethoven had written 9 of those, and not being able to actually come up with finding his own voice. It took him, you know, over 20 years to write his first symphony, and then after that, he could actually get off to a different path. But it's always interesting for me to see what composers throughout the last 250 years or so how they have actually been handling the ghost of Beethoven. It reminds me, there's another composer, contemporary composer, that you're very familiar here, because I think she was recently in residence at the Palau. Yeah, Caroline Shaw, who also had at some point commissioned to write a piece for the same size orchestra than Beethoven had in the piano concertos. And she came up with actually a piece that also had to be played alongside the third piano concerto by Beethoven. So I think it's very interesting, because everyone kind of leaves that influence in very different manners. And I think David did it most beautifully. I think I was very curious what you would do about the overture, because we know that Beethoven for Fidelio wrote 4 different overtures, so you were very smart to kind of avoid the overture altogether. No. So no overture. What to say? I mean, a very, very powerful, you know, not only a piece of music, but production. Being part of this is obviously, you always realize how powerful it is even more when you step outside of it. I'm now so busy to try to make it work that, you know, I'm the least objective about how powerful it is. And actually, some of this I'll see tonight for the first time in terms of the production as well. So it's live, I mean. So it's a very, very humbling experience to be part of this with a beautiful chorus, as always. I spoke briefly about the size of the orchestra because you shared with the orchestra last night, which I think is very interesting, that you kept the same forces that Beethoven had for Fidelio, except adding maybe a couple of percussion instruments. Of course, you wouldn't hear the glockenspiel or the bass drum so much in Fidelio, but this is a particularly stunning. What kind of a powerful musical piece you created with such very, very small means, and I find this exponentially. In terms of sound, what you create is exponentially more dramatic than even some of the pages that I remember from the opera. So, bravo. And I must say, collaborating first time with Elkhanah is a privilege. So, I hope the first of many more.
Yeah. Mercedes. La Mercedes està ja... Sí que estàs farta del grec, perquè aquest any amb els cors de l'Orfeus hem explotat fins a la desesperació. Deuen voler anar de vacances, però explica'ns una mica la participació dels homes en aquest projecte.
Gràcies, Cesc. Efectivament, jo, més enllà del cansament, el que sí que voldria ressenyar és que pel Palau de la Música Catalana i els cors de l'Orfeo Català aquest estiu ha estat extraordinari per molts motius, perquè tots els cors pràcticament han participat dins del Festival Grec en espectacles que a més han estat molt atractius, tant pels cors com també dins de la pròpia programació del festival. El cap de setmana passat l'Orfeo Català va ser el protagonista del Requiem de la Llum amb la Marina Mascarell a l'Hospital de Sant Pau, una experiència molt especial pel públic i pel propi cor. El cor de noies de l'Orfeo Català està actualment de gira amb l'espectacle The Pules, que va ser l'espectacle inaugural del Grec. Ara estan tornant de Dublín després d'haver passat per Montreal i encara els hi queda anar a Graz a fer les últimes funcions. I ara mateix la secció masculina del cor jove de l'Orfeo Català i el cor de cambra i la secció masculina del cor de cambra del Palau estan preparant aquest meravellós Prisoner. Recollint una mica les paraules que deia la Elkhanah, sí que m'agradaria destacar que pels homes que estan treballant en aquest projecte està sent realment una experiència molt especial i molt impactant, i destacar sobretot també els joves, perquè el cor jove de l'Orfeo Català està format per nois entre 16 i 24 anys. Llavors, amb aquestes edats, realment viure una experiència treballant en una obra com aquesta que té tanta profunditat a nivell temàtic sobre temes tan universals com és la llibertat humana, els drets humans i en un context polític que actualment al món és un context realment complex, crec que és un espectacle i una experiència personal per qui estan treballant que realment els hi pot portar moltes coses positives. I ja només per això crec que realment és un privilegi poder oferir com a Palau als membres dels cors del Palau aquesta possibilitat de col·laborar-hi. Més enllà d'això, per molts d'aquests cantants, sobretot els més joves, és possiblement la primera experiència escènica que tenen i, per tant, també és fantàstic que pugui ser en aquest context. Destacar que en aquest cor hi ha joves del cor jove de l'Orfeo Català, que molts d'ells venen de la nostra escola coral, però també hi ha cantants professionals del cor de cambra, alguns dels quals tenen algun petit rol solista, com són, per exemple, el Pablo Acosta, l'Aniol Botines, el Joan García Gomà i el Matthew Thompson, que són col·laboradors habituals del cor de cambra, que són solistes, que habitualment també fan papers solistes en altres produccions del Palau i que crec que serveixen també molt de referent per tots aquests joves que que entren en el món professional de la mà de projectes com aquest. I res més, dir que per nosaltres és un autèntic privilegi, que crec que aquest grec no l'oblidarem mai i que esperem que en vinguin moltes més d'experiències tan fructíferes com aquestes. Gràcies, Cesc.
Gràcies. Ara, abans de passar a preguntes, jo tenia una qüestió, crec que no hem parlat dels solistes, per això, Robert. And I have a question for David. The other day, due to this postponed anniversary of Beethoven, we had another Beethoven project this year in the festival. There was Sasha Valls, who did the Seventh Symphony that she created for Delphos. And she said something quite interesting for us. She said, Beethoven created that symphony in a moment where there was a world to disappear and the new world was not there yet. What do you know about the political context when Fidelio was created? Do you think how was the political situation then? Can we relate to that moment in a way or another?
Well, I think it was a moment where people were trying to figure out what the real meaning of the French Revolution would be. So a great uprising had taken place and overthrown the aristocracy, and then a great terror had taken place, so lots of horrible things in its wake, and then an empire had been built out of it. So there were, right in quick succession, several models of ways that the world could change, not all of them good. And so I think that was the world in which Beethoven was trying to kind of thread a needle and to figure out what is the position, right? So, and I think that's another reason why he concentrated on the marriage, because to say something about the politics was to take a side. Fidelio was premiered in Vienna in 1805, and Napoleon's troops were in Vienna at the time it was premiered. So it was not the right time to say, we need to overthrow an empire, because an empire was just coming in. That would not have been an acceptable message. So he really has to be very, very careful, because the world hasn't decided which of those political systems will win.
And you, when you wrote this version, were you thinking about the politics?
Well, I think about politics all the time, unfortunately, and I don't know about your country, but my country is a mess. So, and one of the things I was interested in politically in my country is I think my country has more prisoners than any other country in the world, right? I think that we are very quick to make things a crime and to find people guilty of them. And I think that there's a political reason, because of course in our country, if you are in prison, you can't vote. So one of the reasons why the prison system has been so expanded in America is because if you can imprison people, in particular if you can imprison black people, you won't have to have black people voting. So there's a whole way in which the prison economy in America, this is probably way too much information, but when the slaves in America were freed after our Civil War in 1865, there were a bunch of constitutional amendments to make it so that black people could vote and black men could vote, and so that people would be freed. But as part of the same amendments, they said, well, we can still have slaves if they're prisoners. So it's actually written into our constitutional amendments that we're still allowed to have slaves if they are prisoners. And so, part of the incredible growth of the prison industry in America is because it's labor and it's suppression of vote. I think probably every time is a time of uncertainty about politics. So I can't off the top of my head remember a time when everyone in the world was happy and where everything worked. I think the lesson of politics, and maybe one of the things I think about, is that everyone needs to be vigilant all the time about when rights are being taken away from you or someone else. And no matter what system you are in, you will never be able to relax, or you should never relax. One of the things which is interesting in my piece, the way I tried to set it up, or at least interesting to me, is the evil governor, who is the person who represents the system that oppresses these people, is much smarter than everybody else, right? He has a system and he has a worldview. He knows what he is doing. So the prisoner would like to be left alone, and Fidelio would like to be left alone. The assistant would like to be left alone. The jailer doesn't want to think about it, right? No one really wants to think about this because it's a full-time job. The only person who is smart enough and dedicated and sophisticated enough to have a worldview is the person who wants to use that worldview to oppress everyone. So, in my country, I think the evil people are smarter than the good people, so unfortunately.
Thank you. No sé si no hem parlat dels solistes, no sé si vols dir alguna cosa.
Maybe you can tell us a little bit about the soloists, David, or
who wants to talk about the...
Okay, so we have an incredible cast, I have to say. So there's an assistant who is the Fidelio character, so the Leonora character, so the woman who has changed her identity to become a man so she can work in this prison and find her husband. And that is Claren McFadden, who's an American soprano who lives in the Netherlands for many years. Incredible. And I think she has sung at Auditory, or so she's
been working in Catalonia for sure, not in Auditory before. No.
She's amazing. Actually, in fact, they're all amazing. I'm not even going to say that about any of these people anymore because they're all great. The jailer, the character who is Rocco in the original, right, is Devon Tynes, who's an amazing American, I just said it again, this incredible American bass baritone. The tenor is Alan Oak, and he plays the governor, the evil governor. His name is the Governor. In the original, the Don Pizarro character. And I saw him originally in a Thomas Addis opera, and I thought he was very scary, and I thought he was perfect for this role, and he is. And then the prisoner is Jarrett Ott, who is an amazing, beautiful baritone singer, and he plays the Florestan character, the prisoner.
I think all the information is on the dossier, but if you need any more, then you can ask for. És el moment de les preguntes, penso. No sé si hi ha alguna altra cosa, si no, si ja teniu preguntes per algú de la taula. There's some questions.
Hola, bon dia. Pel que ha dit, en David Lang s'ha inspirat sobretot en el seu país, en els Estats Units. O sigui, no li ha calgut anar més enllà, ni ha tingut prou amb el material carcerari, per entendre'ns, opressor, etc., del seu país, o també s'ha fixat en altres situacions polítiques arreu del món?
Well, there is, I only know my own world, so what I really know is the world I interact with daily. But the influences of this piece are international. So I read Foucault's book on prisons, and I read Hannah Arendt, and I read the book on the French prison system by Didier Fassin. And so I tried to be as knowledgeable as I could about the idea of imprisonment. And that's what led me to some of the texts that I added to this piece. So what I tried to do with the libretto is when I stripped it down to Beethoven's skeleton, then I added things that clarified things in the Beethoven. So when we are in the prison, when we first are introduced to the prison, which is something that I take out of the Beethoven libretto, which is right there in the Beethoven, I added to it a section about what a prison actually is. A prison in the early 19th century is actually a very modern idea. Because before prisons, until then, if you were a criminal, you had a hand cut off, you were killed, whatever. Or you paid money to get out of it, right? The idea of holding someone and keeping possession of someone for a length of time was a relatively new idea. So I looked into where that idea came from, and in fact, one of the philosophers of that was the English philosopher Jeremy Bentham. And his ideas about the modern prison are from 1792, so not that long before Fidelio was written, and that same thinking for Bentham comes out of the same thinking of the French Revolution. So the idea that you can do this thing and it can be humane, right? There's a way in which you put people together and you can rehabilitate people. You don't have to kill them, you don't have to maim them, you can keep them, and after a certain amount of time, they will be rehabilitated into society. But the thing which is interesting about the Jeremy Bentham idea of the panopticon, which was how the prison was built, the modern prison was built around this idea of the panopticon, is one person who is a guard who can see everyone at the same time. And Jeremy Bentham's idea was that this is a model, not just for how prisons would work, but for how schools would work, for how factories would work, how people kept in poor houses could work. Any idea in which people needed to be organized and supervised. This was a specialized new way of observing and controlling the behavior of people. And that was, the birth of the modern prison. So that text is in there. So I wanted to know what are crimes that you would be imprisoned for in 1805. Because I don't know what a crime is in that area, right? There are crimes, what is a crime, right? And Beethoven, one of the things which is interesting is that we never really meet these prisoners, right? Here is this piece that I had been told was all about prisoners, and we see them at one moment where they love freedom and they love the sunlight, which is very beautiful. But of course, we all love the sunlight and we all love freedom. Who are these people individually and what are their lives like? So I did a lot of research and I found a list from 1805, the same year that Fidelio premiered, of listing the crimes of all the people on a ship from England, of criminals being transported to Australia, because that's the way England used to handle their prisoners. And in fact, actually, little side note, before the American Revolution, England sent their prisoners to America. And one of the real problems with the American Revolution was that England needed to find other places to send their criminals. So from 1805, I found a list of the crimes that people were transported for. And I just took that list and set it to music. So the criminals identify themselves and they say, I stole a loaf of bread, I stole a lady's glove, I stole my neighbor's cow, I counterfeited coin. They're all just from this list, and I just used them as a list so that we learn a little bit more who they are. So it's true, I only know my own prison system, not from the inside, thank God. But I did some research too.
Vale, com que també ens estan seguint en streaming, tenim una pregunta que ens trasllada en Pep Gorgori del diari ABC. És per en David Lang. Diu, vostè ha dit que quan va veure Fidelio per primer cop era un radical d'esquerres. M'agradaria saber dues coses. Primer, com descriuria la seva evolució política des d'aquell primer Fidelio fins ara? I en segon lloc, la casualitat ha volgut que Prisoner s'estreni a Espanya just en la jornada de reflexió. Als Estats Units es va estrenar en l'època de Trump. Com diria que dialoga Prisoner amb les eleccions espanyoles de diumenge en particular i el moment que viu la política europea en general?
No sé si ha dit radical, però ha dit d'esquerres.
Well, I became a composer because I saw a concert of music by Shostakovich when I was 9 years old, and I became totally in love with Russian music. So I studied Russian language. I studied in the Soviet Union for a summer. I became totally interested in the difference between American politics and Soviet politics, because in the 60s, when I was a young boy, that was America's big fear, right? So it made me feel hip and cool to be paying attention to America's biggest world enemy. And so, and I'm still stopped at customs many times in America because someone says, oh, did you study in Russia? And yes, I did. And all the time I was in Russia, I fought with people about politics because, you know, the Soviet Union was terrible also. So, but to me, the interesting thing about it was there was a history in Russia of kind of perpetual revolution, of people trying to kill the Tsar, people trying to imagine what their system should be, inventing anarchy, inventing different ideas about how things might be able to be changed. I don't think they came up with any one that worked, but to me, the exciting idea, which is left from those days of my political searching, is the notion that you are born into a world that can change, that you can actually change the system that you live in, and you can actually organize with your fellow citizens to make something different. You don't have to just take what you have inherited. So I could not possibly begin to say anything about the local political situation because I barely have the energy to pay enough attention to all of the terrible things going on in my country. So I have no idea what's going in your country, but I do want to say I wish you all the best of luck.
Sònia, sisplau. Aquí.
Volia fer una pregunta a la directora d'escena perquè diu aquí que és una posada en escena econòmica però convincent. Si ens podries explicar una mica més en què consisteix la posada en escena. Després al senyor Lang m'agradaria preguntar-li una mica si ens podria dir més o menys l'estructura, si és una estructura més clàssica o en quin llenguatge es mou de l'òpera que veurem, comparada amb d'altres de la seva producció. I també, com curiositat, m'agradaria pensar si és vostè una mica com Wagner, vull dir que cada vegada li agrada més tenir tot controlat, en el sentit de que no és la primera vegada que escriu el llibret d'alguna de les seves obres i òperes. Què li aporta i què li treu això de valor? I per últim, al Cesc o al Robert, estarà microfonat els cantants, hi haurà subtítols, etc. Gràcies.
Well, first, please.
To speak a bit more about the staging, something just to respond to what David was describing about the panopticon, right? When we were preparing the designs for the production, we also do a lot of research. And so there's looking at prison systems and throughout the world, and what are some of the themes that are consistent, and cages and bars and keeping people in boxes of some kind is very much the standard for all over the world. One of the themes that was interesting that also comes up in a lot of the earlier prison reform is the idea of having a godly light that comes from somewhere in the prison cell, whether it is a window, at the back, or in the ceiling, to give a prisoner the opportunity to contemplate the betterment of themselves. And so that was an interesting piece of the architectural puzzle of this, only because it's sort of in opposition to everything we say about it's a control of society, it's a way to have forced labor and all of these other things. So some people were also simultaneously working on working with light as a way of possible transformation. So that was just an interesting design element. The other things that influenced what we're doing is I always look at the DNA of what the composer is making in the music and the text on the page, and try to bring that to the stage in the way that is resonant with what the composer is doing. And in David's case, it is very compressed and very consolidated to this distilled essence. He keeps talking about the bone or the spine. And so wanting to do things that are as much the same as what he is doing with the staging so that we are illuminating his intention. And also this idea of no extra, no ornamentation that is unnecessary. There's another theme that is on the page in his work for this piece. It's noted a few times, which is called out of time. And so there are a few distinct moments where we go out of normal time musically inside of the piece. And so those are, again, clues for a director about how to play with time and the illusion of time, and what does time mean for prisoners, right? Because if you're in solitary confinement for a great deal of time, time takes on different meanings and is a different journey. So we also knew we wanted to have a place for the prisoners to be where they were present, but also where they could kind of go away, because we go in and out of a very personal story and then into this sort of prison world, right? So we go from very individual scene work into something bigger with the chorus, and we go back and forth. And so we just were trying to come up with a way of being able to really focus on the very private story, but then also to expand into the bigger narrative. And, you know, like all great work, the more specific and personal it is, then the more universal it becomes. And so David, very specific in his research and his own artistic vision, then blooms into making it resonant wherever we take this story.
I have to say, I love this production, and I love what Elkhanah and all the designers have done, because you know, when I imagined all of this piece, it was very, you know, kind of ethereal and amorphous. And so what Elkhanah has done is made everything incredibly physical and incredibly visible. So this thing that was just imaginary to me, then it's just laid out in front of you in the most persuasive and simple and clear and direct way possible, which I really appreciate. And I think it also makes it really easy for the singers to imagine who their characters are, because their space is so clearly organized for them. And the action, I think, is pared down exactly the way the text is pared down. There's nothing extra. There's nothing fancy. There's nothing unneeded. There's nothing ornamental. So everything that happens to drive you to the goal of telling the story. So I think it's really, you know, a fantastic job. As far as doing everything myself, you know, it's weird as a composer, because, you know, you spend most of your time alone by yourself in your studio. And so because of that, every project becomes very personal. So sometimes when you are working on a project that has words, it's okay if it's someone else's words, because you are reacting to those words, you know. But for a project like this, what I was really reacting to was my own memory and my own philosophy and my own opinion. And for me, the great gift of working on this piece was being able to sit in my studio and listen 100 times to Fidelio and remember it and think about it and imagine what it means to me. So much of this piece ended up being personal about what I believe, that I don't think I could have worked with another librettist, right? Because I really was just trying to figure out for myself, sort of using the opera as a laboratory to imagine what I think, which is, complicated and difficult and really, hard to organize, So these pieces are very useful for me because I get to pay attention to what I think, right? And then hopefully I know what I think better. I have written pieces where other people have done the libretto, and I have also written pieces where I have written the libretto and I have been the stage director and I have hired everyone and I've run all the rehearsals and I've sold the beer and I've cleaned the bathrooms and, every project that you do has a different doorway for you depending on what it is you are hoping to get out of it. And I think one of the things which is really exciting for me is that each project has a different size doorway for me and a different size job. And that keeps it very fresh.
Estudio, si vols. Falta l'última pregunta, si et sembla. Bueno, o volies dir alguna cosa tu? Digues. No, a nivell de descripció d'espai, sí que hi ha has vist les imatges en el fons de l'escenari, hi ha com una reixa que representa la presó, hi ha també, els subtítols estan en dues pantalles grans a banda i banda, per tant sí que està en català, i la microfonia és la bàsica, perquè l'espai del teatre grec sí que necessita una mica d'amplificació bàsica, no sé si amb això vols contestar tu.
Sí, anava a completar una mica el tema de l'amplificació. L'amplificació és estètica en aquest cas. És important tenir-ho present perquè forma part de la idea estètica de l'ANG. I per tant sempre s'ha treballat, això podria explicar millor tu, s'ha treballat l'amplificació. En el nostre cas hem tingut la sort de poder treballar-ho a Sala 1 aquesta setmana mentre hem assajat i hem fet un preset. Evidentment l'espai no té res a veure, però arribem preparats per a anar més ràpids a partir d'aquesta nit amb el general i demà ja atacar el show. I volia comentar, perquè has preguntat una mica sobre la peça. La meva sensació, humil perspectiva, és que estem en el terreny de la nova creació i per tant hi ha la sofisticació de David Lang en el llenguatge i en la música i és molt reconeixible el seu llenguatge, crec jo, també en aquesta peça. I formalment l'obra és molt comprensible. Hi ha un domini de la forma que es fa molt evident. Jo crec que quan vingueu a veure-ho tindreu aquesta sensació. La història... No sé, jo des d'Europa, potser Ludovic aquí podrà completar una mica el que dic, però des de la tradició europea sempre tinc molt aquesta sensació quan tenim present peces des de la creació contemporània americana, que hi ha un domini de la forma i de la manera d'explicar les històries que les fa molt properes, les fa molt comprensibles. A vegades potser a Europa anem en una altra direcció i ens perdem en altres aspectes. I don't know if you agree with what I said, sorry.
I agree. Només vull afegir una cosa abans que
The only thing I would like to add in furthering answering your question about the form of the opera is it's a number opera. Huh? Can we call it this? So very much following the tradition that Fidelio is in, almost to the numbers of movements. Huh? So it's exactly the same number of numbers. Huh? 15?
It's very much, if you know Fidelio, you know exactly where you are at every moment. And as in Fidelio, there's spoken parts. And I wanted to keep everything about Fidelio that makes it unique. But I comment on everything that I keep. So there's a very famous offstage trumpet in the original. So I have an offstage trumpet who's not offstage. So there's everything that happens in the original is in my piece, which was really fun for me. But also, if you know Fidelio, you will not get lost.
Except the overture. Except the missing overture.
Yeah, maybe that's right. But that was part of the joke also, was everyone would wonder, I think, well, what will you do with the 4 overtures? Where will they go? What order are you doing them in, and where do you stick them? And I just thought, you know something? No overtures.
I would like, if I may, just for the record, because I haven't really said a word about the casting either, and I just don't think David said how amazing they are indeed enough. I think it's been also incredible to come to a production like feeling that I'm the new kid in the thing, because they all had experience with it on completely different settings and sometimes with different teammates and partners. But I find coming into a production like this with already all those layers in place has been really, really rewarding for me as well.
Imagina, sembla que tenies... O Marta, no sé qui era dels dos. Volies preguntar.
Ressona Beethoven en algun moment, la música? Aquesta és una pregunta. I l'altra, quan parlava dels delictes, que va trobar aquella llista al 1805 amb tots aquells delictes dels que van anar cap a Austràlia, etc., li ha atribuït algun delicte concret en el Prisoner? Quin?
What was the first part of the question?
If Beethoven, if resonates Beethoven, if some of the notes or...
Oh, no, there's no Beethoven music, no. There's absolutely no Beethoven music, it's just the libretto. So, I have a lot of... I'm not very humble, but I would never want to do anything with Beethoven's music, never. So, as far as the crime of, you don't really know in the original what the prisoner is in prison for, right? He's written something against the government, but you don't really know what it is or what the politics of it is, or you don't really know what the crime is. So I imagined in my piece that the crime that he is guilty of is imagining that there can be a better future. So there's, because there's the world we are in and the world we could be in, and his crime is imagining that we can be in the world that we are not living in, but we could be living in. And so there's a constant refrain in this piece when the prisoner is talking about the better world, about, well, something that could happen in a better world, in the better world than the world that we live in. And so to me, I just thought that that was the largest way of describing what a crime could be for a political prisoner, is the crime of the imagination that things could be better.
Wow. Marta, em sembla que volies preguntar alguna cosa.
Jorín, ahora que habla si el crimen es la imaginación, es muy oscuro esto. ¡Qué miedo! Primero. Okay.
Bueno, pots parlar de censura també, vull dir que aquí ara mateix en aquest país...
Y después, una cosa, si no ha tenido la tentación cuando componía la obra y escribía el libreto, de introducir crímenes y cosas de hoy en día, ¿no? O sea, las drogas, por ejemplo, en Estados Unidos, a la palabra de las prisiones, la mayoría de gente de Estados Unidos está en prisión por un tema de drogas.
It's not a current event opera. I don't really want it to be specific. And it says in the score also that it doesn't really want to be located in any particular time. It could be in the past or in the future. So I think the more specific you are about what people... I mean, it's strange actually making a piece about a big topic like this, because the more specific you are, the more you understand it now, and the more you may not want to understand it later. Or, I mean, what if miraculously we solve the drug problem in America? We will find another reason to put people in prison, right? So people will listen to my piece then and say, oh, that's an anachronism, right? We don't do that anymore. Now we imprison people for, dropping a paper cup on the street. And the thing also which is really interesting about Beethoven now that I think about it is that Beethoven doesn't deal in specifics in any of his social pieces or his public-spirited pieces. They're about large ideas, about how we could relate to each other. And to me, I feel like that's where art can play a role.
Molt bé, hauríem d'anar acabant. No sé si hi ha... if it's short. you want the microphone? Sònia, li pots passar el micro, sisplau, al Nil? Ell és el productor també de la gira.
It's a short question, but not a short answer. I'm so fascinated by the discussions in relation to the history of the piece, the contemporary ideas in the piece, and it's really a question for the maestro, for Ludovic Marlot. I just wonder whether, as a conductor who conducts many operas and many new works, what are your ideas about the true role of contemporary opera in today's world?
Short answer.
I don't have any.
That's cool because we know we've been rehearsing until late last night. Well, first of all, I'm going to start by diverting this and say one thing that I want to emphasize. I think the timing of these performances here at the Grec for us at OBC is ideal because we come to a time where we're really exhausted. And I think it's true for the chorus and all of us. And I think actually this opera benefits from that kind of heaviness of feeling that we can bring on stage tonight and so forth and so on. But also, it links it beautifully to the opening of our next season, with where we're opening with Beethoven's Third Symphony, Eroica, which is really kind of in the same vein. And I wanted to do that little bridge because I think for us it's an opportunity to talk about also the very strong themes that we're bringing to next season. And maybe through this, I'm just actually thinking about contemporary opera being what David was just describing, sometimes kind of focusing on a very current event that becomes more of a fait divers rather than something that will stay in history. I mean, I think the wonderful thing about contemporary operas when it deals with the big pieces of literature, for instance. I'm thinking, you've mentioned Thomas Hades, and I can't help thinking of The Tempest now. And when you treat subjects of such universal dimension and timeless in the sense of the topics it encounters, I think then you're creating something for eternity in the sense of how it's going to relate to generations to come and how you can tie it on to other things too. I find it is true not only in opera. I work mostly in the symphonic repertoire. Actually, my contribution to opera to the stage is very limited. But I find that it's true in some ways with music that is attached to a theme. I find thematic music becomes more quickly old than the music of, let's say, Brahms and the music that we know that doesn't really have a program. Programmatic music for me can become very, very quickly exhausted if the craft is not impeccable, and I just find that in opera, maybe my answer would be that it could suffer from the same disease. I don't know if it's a satisfying answer. I think I'll slip over this, but it's clearly for me. I think the more the more emblematic, the more general the topics that you're trying to address, the more you give a chance to actually work with more economical means as well. And I think you said it beautifully about how Elkhanah produced this production. There's nothing extravagant, and therefore it makes it more powerful. And I think I would say that for your score as well. I think there's not one note or one idea that I think could be discarded. And in that sense, I think if not only in contemporary opera, but in any kind of genres, if the craft is so impeccable that it can just live by being the minimum that really needs to be put in the page, I think that creates a much more profound and durable experience and message to carry through as a performer. I'm talking from the perspective of the humbling, trying to deliver the truth from what David has trying to create, really.
Bé, hauríem d'anar tancant, si voleu, només una petita anècdota de cara a la direcció escènica, que també volia donar les gràcies als tècnics del teatre perquè s'han esforçat per construir una presó sota l'escenari del Grec. O sigui, tindrem una petita novetat, és que l'escenari del Grec a sota serà una presó que veurem també amplificada, però que és en part i quasi tot un esforç dels tècnics que ens ho és una anècdota divertida. Maybe you want to finish, Robert, David, you want to close?
No, gràcies a tots, feliços de ser aquí, un plaer, un luxe i bueno, per tots els que en formem part. Ara em deia el David quan veníem amb el taxi que realment ha sigut gairebé balsàmic aquest final de gira després de la pandèmia i després d'haver hagut de trencar aquest projecte que anava endavant, no? I ara ho viu com una reconciliació, com una retrobada gairebé, no sé, emocional, no?
Well, thank you all very much. I'm really happy. I really hope that you come and you enjoy it. And one other thing I would like to say is it's really wonderful that this piece is made with the great collaboration of these wonderful artistic organizations in your city. So it is really wonderful that everyone from these different groups can come together to work so well and so cooperatively and so powerfully. And I hope to see you all there.